Today we find the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan. They've walked across on dry ground. Would God make good on his promise then to give them the land that they're now standing on? Joshua, God's leader, sure believed he'd do that, what he promised. And so they set out on their task, and it was a magnificent task if you think about the amount of land that they were about to go into. Taking this land fully from the inhabitants? How did Joshua do? He did. You can't argue with him, right? He did pretty good. Did Israel get what they hoped for from their leader, Joshua? I think certainly, yeah, and then some. Well, this section of the study is going to consider the effort required to conquer that land that we know as Israel. 2 chapters in Joshua, chapters 5 and 6, give us totally all we know about the story and the effort that was required. The story is told and retold in the books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, how they conquered Canaan. But these 2 chapters are very important chapters. Here's my division of the Old and New Testament, 3 years to get from Genesis through Jesus, and we're almost at the end of the very first year. Have patience, and we will get through all of it. Even if the number gets down to 1 and I'm standing here talking to myself, we're still going to do that. So we will get through these lessons in a matter of years. Today we enter the 4th quarter of our first year of the study, and we have concluded 3 quarters of 13 lessons each, and we're now entering the very last quarter of the first year. We have a total of 156 lessons that are going to take us all the way from Genesis 1 through Revelations 22 for a total of 1,189 chapters. If you're reading it as we go through this, this is a good thing. You could read the whole Bible as we go through this. Now's a good time to start doing that if you haven't been doing it. Okay. Wikipedia, which is, I guess, the encyclopedia of today, right? I mean, if you have a question, you always go and see what Wiki has to say about it. Wikipedia makes note of this event. So far, Wikipedia says, has not been validated by historians or excavations in the area where the walls should have been. The walls have been validated, but the falling of them on this day has not. Does that test your patience or your belief in the truth of the Bible any? It doesn't test mine in the least little bit. It doesn't test my faith in the men and women who spent their lives dedicated to studying ancient history, though. It does test my faith in those people. So here's a disclaimer that Wikipedia gives. Some scholars seem to agree on one point: the book of Joshua is less history and more doctrine. I think it's all history with doctrine thrown in. It explains how Israel has been judged by their obedience to the teachings in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, most people see it as a propaganda book for the kingdom of Judah and their attempts to explain why they feel, some of them even feel, even today, that they own the whole Levant. The book was not written near the time of Joshua, but much later during the time of King Josiah, or even much later after the fall of Jerusalem, even possibly after the return of Israel from Babylonian exile. That's what some people believe. How large is Israel today? How large is it? Have you ever thought about that? Is it the size of Arkansas, for instance? Is it the size of some of our smaller states, Connecticut maybe? Let me say, I think Joshua did an amazing job. The image on the left here shows the area of Palestine at the end of Joshua's life. He conquered all of that land. He took it away from the people who were there, and they own it now. His task was a major one, and the attention given to their efforts in the Bible make it seem even a whole lot larger then than it is today. The Israelites today, though, have given up a considerable part of what they once owned of that promised land. Today, they have about 25% of the land that was originally theirs, just 25%. It's a small area of only 2,300 square miles. The second map over here shows how nations have gradually reduced them and compressed them. This is the livable area, I suppose, that you would consider for the Israelites. It's even smaller than the U.S.'s smallest state. It's really a shame, I think, what happened to them over that time. It's a testament to what happens when a person or a nation doesn't give God the proper recognition that he deserves. So the real question I have for you is, how big do you imagine Israel to be? How big is this 2,300 square miles really turn out to be? How big in population is the nation of Israel compared to the United States? Perhaps the size of Arkansas? Maybe a smaller state such as Rhode Island? Consider how much airtime, though, the Jews get. How much airtime you see about things happening in Israel and in the news. Just how big are the Jews in Palestine today? That's the question I have for you. Tell me, in your mind, how big is it? How do you describe how big it is? Physically, how big is Israel? Yes? Rhode Island, it's a little bit bigger than Rhode Island. Rhode Island is the smallest one, and it's a little bit bigger than that, but about the size of Rhode Island. That would be a good guess about how big it is. In my mind, Israel is much bigger than that. I still picture it in Old Testament times, right? I picture the land of Israel being all of that over there from the top to the bottom. It's not, though. It's just a tiny little kernel, 25% of that area that Israel used to be. And that's a shame. I honestly think it's a shame for the Jews to be reduced down to that, to let it happen the way that it happened over history, that it's that way. But, of course, I'm not a history major, so I don't know a whole lot about it. Here it is. If you take Israel at the size that it is, it would spring from down below Fayetteville, just around the level of Hot Springs down there, so it's below Fort Smith, and it would go all the way up to Springfield. But it's just a tiny sliver. It's just a real tiny little sliver of land there, and that's it. That's the whole state of the nation of Israel today. Smaller than you might imagine, both in physical size and in population. In total land mass, America is 9.5 million square miles. The land mass of Israel is about only 9,000 square miles. Just a little bit less, perhaps, than even the smallest portion of America's size. It's a very, very tiny part of our nation, if you would consider it. Now, if you overlay it where Arkansas is, you can see where it would go there. If you took Israel and somehow transported it to the corner of northwest Arkansas, and it would stretch all the way up to Springfield, Missouri, and down to close to around Hot Springs. The U.S. population is about 342 million people. The Jews in Palestine are only less than 0.3% of that number. Tiny, just a very tiny little part of the world, the globe, yet it's so important, isn't it? Very important. So here Israel is, camped on a mountain overlooking the massive city of Jericho. Joshua has led them to this place, and they're looking at from the mountain down, and they're seeing what it's going to be like when they move over into the Promised Land. The people in the highly fortified city, though, knew that a large influx of foreign people were pushing in. So don't you think they were out fixing and mending walls and getting things ready in case something happens? And it was not just one wall the Jews were looking at, it was two walls in the city of Jericho. There were only two entrances to the whole city there. Those were in the south portion. You see the two doors on the first fence of the first wall there. That's all. Everything flowed through those two areas. And on top of it all off, there's a water-filled moat around this city. God certainly gave them a challenge when Israel came and looked down at what they were about to go do, didn't they? You would think, I would think, how in the world are we going to get across the moat? And then once we swim across, how are we going to conquer these people that live in this city? It's so fortified. You have to crawl up these two steps to get up to the only two doors that are into the city. We can't sneak in from the back or the side. We all have to enter those to get in too. If the Jews felt they could conquer this, perhaps I think they felt they could conquer pretty much anything they ran into. This was a test for them. It was a tremendous test for them. In chapter 5, an interesting interaction took place between Joshua and, I'll call him an angel, just hours before they attempted to gain access to the fortified city. This angel said, "Are you with us or are you against us?" Joshua said, "Neither." Joshua then asked for more information about this man, who he was. He didn't know who he was. He replied, "I'm neither with or against you. I am the captain of God's army. By the way, you should take off your dirty shoes. You're standing on holy ground. And then he told Joshua what was about to happen. An interesting interaction that happened. Who do you think the captain of God's army might be? I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think it was a pre-incarnate Jesus who came. And that's why the ground around him was holy. That's the only reason I can think of it being holy. And so if that's the case, Jesus came and told him to get ready for the thing that he was about to go do. Jesus knew what he was going to do later. It probably was no less than a significant thing that this guy was about to go do as well. Other possibilities would include perhaps an angel, right? Perhaps the Holy Spirit. It could be God himself appearing to this man, or the pre-incarnate Christ, as I tend to believe, but we don't know. We have no clue. Now Joshua recognized his importance right away, and he fell down to worship, in the place where they were standing became holy ground. Jesus is shown in Revelation leading a great army, and I believe it was probably Jesus pre-incarnate, as I said before. Okay, so here's the battle plan, and oh, by the way, it includes a ridiculously few soldiers. Didn't include a lot of soldiers at all. Once a day, for 6 days, armed men walked around the city, and they blew their horns. How many times were you in Bible class when a teacher told you this story and got you to get up and walk around the table that you were sitting at, perhaps? The priests are going to follow, they're going to blow their horns, and they're going to carry the ark. And all of them were to be perfectly silent. God told them, do this every day for 6 days. Wow. Just walk around that fortified city, on the outside of it. Don't try to go in. Don't knock on the doors. Just walk around, and at some points, be quiet. Don't even make noise. And then after the final pass, everyone is to shout, and the walls will fall down. Now, imagine yourself trying to explain what's going to happen in this battle plan to these people who are ready to fight in the Israel camp, and him telling you, just take heart. All you got to do is march around it every day for a week, and on that last day, give a loud shout, and the walls are going to fall down in front of you, and you'll be able to run in and take it. It's just an amazing story to me. It's just almost an unbelievable story. How did someone convince them that that was going to happen? But hadn't they seen enough to know that God's a pretty powerful person? They certainly had. There's no question about that. They'd seen miracles performed. God's capable to do that. He's capable to do this, perhaps is what they reasoned. Do you think they had a lot of faith in that, though? What do you think their faith was when they walked in and on those 7 days walked around? I'd like to give them the benefit of doubt and tell them every one of them believed wholeheartedly that was going to happen. I think, though, like us, they probably took a wait-and-see attitude. It's possible. We'll have to wait and see what God does. Well, the people did exactly as God asked. On the 7th day, as they shouted, the walls fell down, just like God promised, just like every Bible class teacher when you were a little child told you it was going to happen. It actually happened that way. Now, the Bible tells us that Rahab and her family were spared, right? They were the only ones that this calamity didn't fall upon after they ran in and started killing everyone. They were the only ones left. All the gold in the city went into the Israelites' treasury. And finally, Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who would attempt to rebuild that city. Now, can you imagine how this might have felt to the Jews who were looking for a home? Surely, God, this is a home for us. We can make a happy nation here if you just let us, or let it be one of our homes. But no, God's intention was for them to destroy it. Tear every brick down, he told them. Surely, he could make a perfect home from all those bricks, couldn't he? No, God said tear them down. So what happened to the inhabitants? What happened to the inhabitants? Everything that inside the city that was living was slaughtered. Men, women, children, oxen, sheep, goats, Everything that had breath in that city was slaughtered. All the people, except for Rahab and her family, because of the oath God had made with them, were the only ones who were spared. Can you imagine how bloody that scene was? How much effort it took to make that happen? What they left and left behind, in the image that was in their mind when they left. What did they do with the bodies? The Israelites would have wanted to bury them in a decent way. They just left them. Didn't clean it up, didn't do anything about it. How can a loving God command such death and misery? That's the question. I don't have an answer. All I know is it was in his plan for that to happen. It had to happen this way in order for everything that he promised and every fulfillment that he ever gave to the Bible would be true. And this one, I will ask him one day, how can you be a person of love and yet take this many people at one point in time even and kill them in the way that was killed? Looking at the city from overhead today gives you a glimpse. It's not blue like that. I put that blue coloring on there, but looking at it today gives a glimpse of what the landscape was for Joshua and his army. Their foe lay safely atop a hill, not behind one wall, but two walls of defense, and a water-filled moat that surrounded it. For their first big job, it was a pretty big job, I got to tell you. Today, the modern city of Jericho is built all around the old city that was described in the Bible. It was a city with two ramparts and two very strong walls. Probably those inside felt a sense of peace. They didn't worry about any force that was about to happen prior to the Jews and until this actually fell and their city was destroyed. The city today, the old part of the city today is called Tel Es Sultan. It's one of the oldest cities in Levant. It's also one of the lowest cities, being almost 10,000 feet below sea level, 9,000 feet actually. Excavations have revealed not one, but not two, but three sets of walls, and all of those had been built at different times. The city has one of the oldest flowing springs within its walls. So even though it was up high, it had a spring there that gave them water. Yes. You did? You walked down to see a spring? Okay. And went down to it? Yeah, very scary and dark, I'll bet, yeah. Some people are so fortunate to have been over there. I never have. I haven't set my foot in the Holy Land, and I won't until I get to heaven, I suppose. But maybe I will. I don't know. Modern archaeologists propose that at the time of Joshua, the city was empty. If you go ask an archaeologist today who's been there, who's looked at it, who's made their determination, by the time Joshua got there, the city was empty and had been destroyed 200 years before Joshua got there. At the time of Joshua, the city was bare, they say, and totally unoccupied, and there was nothing for Joshua to conquer. The Bible's account completely discredits that theory. That's the prominent theory of today. That's the kind of stuff we're up against. I mean, we're up against people who, well, never mind, I won't go off on a rant. Here are some facts about the city at the time of Jesus. Herod made the city his winter home, like a great place to go in the wintertime. Why? Why do you think it was a great place in the wintertime? Tropical climate, because Israel is like so many thousand feet higher, and it's colder up there. It's warmer down here, and you literally drop down to go to Jericho and the area around here. You drop down to go there, and it's warm there in the wintertime. This is where he healed blind Bartimaeus, where he had an interesting talk with Zacchaeus, who was a wee little man. Y'all want to sing that song right now? No, I know you do, but we're not going to, because I'm not going to lead singing it. Not going to do it. It took about 4 hours to walk there from the city of Jerusalem. Here Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan on the way to Jericho. To get here, going down to Jerusalem, you will descend about 3,000 feet, and the weather difference, like I mentioned, is significant. The city is mentioned in the book of Hebrews with a warning about its coming fall and what would happen under Rome. Now, this is not Rome we're talking about here. This devastation that already happened. Rome is going to come in and do the same thing to the city that exists at that time. And they do that at the same time that Jerusalem is destroyed in AD 70. Rome comes in. So here's a question. We know they marched around the city, right? We all sang that song. We all at nursery school were told that as little bitty children how God's people walked around the city and all the walls fell. Well, we know there was an outer mud brick wall and an inner stone wall. Which way did these walls fall? Did they fall inside or did they fall outside? What do you think? We know. We know which way they fell. We can see some of the remains of these, and we know that they fell outward. They didn't fall inward. If they had fallen inward, they would be throwing rocks uphill, for one thing, and those rocks would lay where they are and make a rampart, even that the Jews would have to then try to get over. They didn't have to do that, though. When they fell down, it made a nice slope. They were able to crawl across those and move on up and conquer things. So they fell outward. It made the scaling of that whole area a lot easier for them. Now, there was a famous archaeologist. His name was Garstang. I've read some stuff that Garstang had done in places. That name sounded familiar to me when I went through this. He's found many things in the Bible were true about this city. Inside, there were fresh water sources. They didn't have to go out of the wall to get water, and that was a very important thing for them. They found the outer mud brick wall did fall outward, just as the Bible says it did. The second stayed upright, though. Only one section of the outer wall didn't fall. Can you imagine why? Who? Rahab. That's probably the area that Rahab lived. That section didn't fall. When the bricks fell, the army built a ramp, of course, to scale the second wall, and they literally walked in. You can find bricks there scorched by fire everywhere, even in the city and outside the city even today. Now, Kathleen Kenyon, who was a famous archaeologist, did some work in Africa, if I believe right. In the 1950s, she went there simply to confirm Garstang's findings because she couldn't believe that Garstang was telling the truth. And she found that the outer wall did fall, but she claimed not to have found any evidence that the city was populated at the time those walls fell. Today, only a few archaeologists agree with Garstang's findings, and most discount the story in the Bible. Lately, since the 1990s, a group of archaeologists they were founded by this group called Associates for Biblical Research. You run across them from time to time when you're surfing sites as well. Surprisingly, this group of archaeologists attest that Garstang's conclusions are founded and have been confirmed. But nobody seems to care. Most people believe that city was totally empty when the Jews got there. Joshua placed a curse of sorts on the city. He who undertakes to rebuild the city will be troubled with calamity. The loss of his firstborn at the time the new foundation is laid, and the loss of his second son when the gates to the city are erected. Now here's the rest of the story. You may not know this. Before we talk about that, just know that the Bible doesn't say that Jericho would never be inhabited. Never says that. As there are verses that tell of people living there long after Joshua's curse occurred. It also doesn't say that the city would not thereafter be unpopulated. It did not say the city would never be rebuilt. The Bible only says the one who rebuilt that city is going to have a terrible loss. He will lose his first child when part of it's finished, and he will lose his second child before the whole thing is finished. Did this prophecy come true? You probably think not in our lifetime, right? But there's an interesting corroboration with the Bible that the curse did come true. A later king named Hiel of Bethlehem commissioned the rebuilding, defying Joshua's curse. And as the construction began, guess what? He lost his first son. When the walls were finished, he lost his second son, Segub. Now, some say these are events promised in the Bible that came true. Joshua gave the curse, and so many people believe that Hiel laid its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son, whose name was Abiram, and set up his doors at the cost of his youngest son, or his younger son, Segub. And this was a fulfillment of that curse. The Bible tells us that Joshua did politely ask the people of the city to leave peacefully, but they chose not to do that. And he probably knew they wouldn't do that. none chose to leave. They chose not to abandon their homes, leave them for the Jews. So Joshua's task was routing the people from this city. Why did God tell Joshua to destroy these cities? Well, he knew the presence there of them, if he left them, and their idol worship would lead many of the Jews to become idol worshipers. So Joshua was told to kill all the idol worshipers in Canaan. Did Joshua do good, make good on his promise to God that he was going to do what God wanted him to do? He killed all of the idol worshipers in Canaan? We'll find out, because we're going to talk more about that. We'll find out in later lessons. This was not the only walled city that Joshua had faced. Did you know that? Joshua's task in front of him when he first took command really were 7 fortified cities of the Canaanites. And altogether there were a total of 31 well-fortified cities that Joshua went up against. Jericho, Ai, Jerusalem, they were examples of some strong city-states. So ends the interesting bedtime story of Joshua. Your job this week is to find a child or a grandchild, or just make up a fictitious one, and tell them this story, and reenact it for them if you want to. Little sock puppets and everything. Use boxes of cereal and other boxes and turn them over. Let the kids have fun with your little plastic military men. Let them crawl up over the rubble. Just find some children who are not in high school. It's what I tried to do. It didn't work. So I know that won't work. You have any questions or comments or even snotty remarks about this lesson? What we talked about? No questions. I covered it all. Surely I left something out. Here's one. I've read it. Yeah. Mitch, pardon me. He was Mitchell, right? He's one of my favorite authors. I've read a lot of his books. They're all about like that. So, I don't know. Any other questions? All right, I'll let you go. Early even. Yeah, you're welcome.